and you die in it, you have no idea what it is. I claim that's the way we live with money. Here's the plan. I first give a couple of definitions because it's useful to agree on vocabulary. Then I'll go with the archetypal dimension of money, given that we are in the transpersonal psychology context. Initially, I was thinking of talking only about that. Having listened and met some of the audience yesterday, I have decided, instead of going in depth in one topic, to actually cover the breadth. So I'll be talking about something that I do in 5 different conferences, but they all hang together. So the last 3 years have done work on the domain of complexity science, complexity theory, and how that applies to explain why our money system is unstable, as you may have noticed from the press. Then we'll see that the 2 approaches, the scientific one and the deep psychology one, actually converge. They make the same point. And finally, I'll be talking about monetary Tantra, which is the title of a workshop I'll be giving on Tuesday, next Tuesday, here in Moscow. Let me start with 4 simple questions. How many of you have had any course in economics? Whether it's communist or whether it is economics. All right, so the majority. Great, great. Who creates money? Is it the government? Anybody believe that the government creates money? Is it the central bank? Okay. Is it someone else? Who believes it's someone else? All right, there are about 10 people. Good. How is money created? Is it created by printing presses? Okay. Is it created by debt? 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. Okay. Let me study the first fact. Every dollar you've seen, every ruble you've seen, every euro you've seen, every national currency you've ever seen is someone's bank debt. It is created, they say it in Latin, in fiat money. They say it in Latin because we make sure that nobody should understand. It means the power to create out of nothing by the banking system as debt. Either it's government debt, corporate debt, or private debt. So that's the first point. 3/4 of the audience had a degree of economics. They were never told. Interesting. You can have a PhD in monetary theory and never be told what money is. I met them. Now, we also noticed that every country has only one currency, right? Russia has rubles. The Euroland has, America has only dollars. How is that monopoly enforced? Is there a law that says you're not allowed to use anything else? How many believe that? 1 person. Hello? Okay. In fact, it is done by taxes. Everybody owes taxes, and the taxes are payable only in that one currency. Therefore, business can use something else. They can barter, they can do anything else. As long as you pay taxes on what you do, everything is fine. And the taxes can only be paid in that one currency, which is bank debt money. That's the mechanism by which the monopoly is enforced. Right? Next question. What is money? How many of you believe that they know what it is? One person. Two. All right. May I ask for your definition? Okay. Let me tell you first of all that economic textbooks never say what it is. They say what it does. They talk about the functions of money. Have you noticed that? They say, well, it's a unit of account, it's a medium of exchange, a store of value. That is not what money is. That is what money does. And it's assumed that the same currency does all these things, right? In fact, the working definition I use is money is an agreement. It lives in our heads. It's mostly unconscious agreement. You've never been asked an opinion about it. It's an agreement within a community, typically the nation state today, to use something, whatever that is, as a standard medium of exchange. That's my definition. Now, the second definition I'd like you to understand, which I'll be using here, and I should have less trouble with this audience that I usually have with an audience of bankers, it's yin-yang. The Taoist concept, which is 3,000-4,000 years old in China. You have a coherence between yin and yang. And the whole thing starts actually with the vision of the divine. Every society that believes that there is a God up there who is a male with a beard, invisible, who created everything without a girlfriend, okay, you're definitely in a patriarchal worldview. Okay? Now, in such a worldview, central authority is the way to work, hierarchy is the way to organize things, bigger is better, empires is a good idea, technology dominates, logical linear thinking, peak experiences, having, doing, competition is the way to play. Right? You see the opposite, the incoherence is immanent divinity. Everything is divine. And if you do have gods and goddesses, the ladies play a nice role. Okay? In such a society, you have mutual trust, egalitarian, small is beautiful, interpersonal skills, paradoxical, nonlinear, endurance, sustainability, being instead of having, doing, and cooperation. Have you noticed that that's missing in our society? That's missing in the world. I claim it has something to do with our money, which is what I'll show you. Let's make a distinction between two types of currencies. And I know only one type you know, given that we only have one in all our countries. You have young currencies, which promote competition, which is done by a hierarchy, top down, and which is, incompatible with gift exchanges. If you ever have not understood that, my suggestion is that for the birthday of your girlfriend, you give them a $100 bill, and you're going to have a reaction that you deserve. Not having the point that it's not an appropriate gift. And it actually is generated in the patriarchal value coherence, the one we just saw earlier, right? That one here. Now, yin currencies, and we haven't seen many of those lately, are the opposite. They are currencies that promote cooperation, that are typically generated by the users, not by some guy up there, and that are compatible with gift exchanges. So, and they are used in a community situation. So these are two different types of currencies, only one of which we're familiar with. You may ask, what are the others? I'll give you some examples. They were applicable for thousands of years in Egypt. They were in Western Europe for 250 years, from the 10th to the 13th century. which is the period where courtly love was invented, the honoring of the feminine values. They're today in Bali still. It's one of the few remnants. We have been missing the yin dimension lately, and I think there is a whole section in this Congress, appropriately, this afternoon, on dealing with the re-emergence of feminine values. I claim that unless we reintegrate the feminine dimension and honor it in our society, our species will not survive. That is the stakes that we're in. Our environmental crisis is one of relationship. It is a yin concern. Now, as I told you about the fish, we'll live with a blind spot. You know, a blind spot is the place in the eye where the nerve comes in, the ball. It's a place you don't see anything, even with the best will in the world. That is the way we deal with our money. The way money comes in our society is a blind spot. Why is that? That's amazing, isn't it? Well, one first thing is that we haven't seen it for a while. We have had historical background. In Western Europe for about 700 years, we have been dealing with a monopoly of young money. So, in other words, we cannot imagine anything else. Second one is an ideological brainwash. And I'll show you in a few minutes that actually is true on both the capitalist side and the communist side, which is interesting. There are very few things you would think that are common about economics, except that one, right? There is an academic taboo. And finally, we're dealing with a lobbycracy. I never met anybody who has a monopoly who doesn't want to keep it. And that's the way it is with money. So let me give you the specifics for all four of them. All four reinforce each other. They build on each other. And that's why we don't see anything. If you put in one box all patriarchal societies, China, Sumer, Babylonia, the Greeks, the Romans, and from the Renaissance to today, they all have something in common. The same kind of money. A monopoly of a young currency, centrally controlled, with interest. It is actually a device to concentrate resources, by definition, right? Interest is a way of getting money from people who don't have enough to people who have already more than they need, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have to be able to lend it. Now, that is a very good, I would claim that without that currency, humanity would never have that industrial revolution. You don't start a steel mill in a backyard. You don't start a railroad in your backyard or in a garage. You need large-scale, massive concentration of resources to make these things happen. Now, that little computer there has a chip that requires $1 billion to be designed and reproduced. It's not something you do in a garage. So concentration of resources is necessary. Now, if you take all matrifocal societies, and you may notice I'm using the word matrifocal and not matriarchal for a simple reason. A matriarchal society has never existed. A matriarchal society would be a society in which the male is reduced to procreative role. That has never happened, except in the imagination of the Greeks. The Amazons have never existed, archaeologically or otherwise, anywhere. So they have not existed. Matrifocal societies are societies that honor feminine values and have a vision of the divine, which includes the feminine. Now, in matrifocal societies, you always have dual currency systems. One young currency, actually identical to the patriarchal one, that is used to trade with people you don't know, long distance. And the second one is a yin currency, that is used in your environment. That is the common characteristic. That was the case in Egypt. That was the case in the Central Middle Ages. That was the case, is still the case. There are about 3,000 local currencies in Bali. And for anybody who's been in Bali?
I live there.
Okay, have you noticed something different about Bali?
It's the island of the gods and goddesses.
Okay, and what's different about the behavior of people?
They live in the now.
Interesting. Are they afraid of the future?
There's sort of no words to describe the future or the past. They live very much in the now. All the languages.
Have you noticed about what is the attitude towards art? Is there a difference between us and them?
We live in a world where time is money. They live in a world where time is art.
Everybody in our valley is an artist. The guy who drives you to the hotel from the airport plays gamelan. His wife dances. So there is a massive difference of society. Now, they have 3,000 local currencies. Every banyar in Bali has its own time currency. Strange, isn't it? Now, that system creates economic stability for centuries. Egypt had 2,000 years without a recession. Try again. All right? The Central Middle Ages from the 10th to 13th century did not have recessions, did not have business cycles. Interesting, right? And the little people at the bottom of social systems had the highest standard of living. In Europe, Western Europe today, the standard of living of the ordinary people in the 12th century in London was higher than today. Let me give you as evidence. It sounds crazy. I couldn't believe it myself. We all know we're taller, right, than our parents or grandparents. And we explain that because we've been fed appropriately during childhood and adolescence, so we grow taller. London is a city that exists since Roman times and actually prehistoric times. They have assembled in the Museum of the City of London all the bones that were found by doing the subway. And these are from prehistoric times, Roman times, Saxon times, all the way to today. They put all those bones together. The women in the 12th century were 1 centimeter taller than today. They are today 7 centimeters taller than in Victorian times. Okay? So you had a massive collapse. Male have caught up in London with the Saxon times of the 12th century in the last 40 years. So, strange, isn't it? Second level of blind spot, polarization. For the last 150 years, we have lived in an ideological war between communism and capitalism. Right? You all heard about it. You're probably better equipped to deal with it than anybody else on the planet. Well, communism is about public ownership, government initiative, central planning. Capitalism is about private ownership, private initiatives, and markets, right? Now, there are several schools in every one of these things. The classical, the Austrians, the neoliberal, the Keynesians, and all that stuff. On the other side, you have Marx and Engels himself, the Marxist, Leninist, the Maoist, and the Trotskyist, and all these guys. There are literally hundreds of thousands of books here of what's different between these people, and millions of books here what's different between these people. There's 0 books about what's common between them. And guess what it is? It is the monopoly of bank debt money with positive interest. Unquestioned. I'm defying anybody here to give me a book that was published on the capitalist side or on the communist side, putting that in question. Isn't that extraordinary? Well, it's actually not. Both these philosophies have emerged from patriarchy. That's what they have in common. So, blind spot, reinforced by the ideological warfare. So what's common is what you don't see. Now, sometime in the 19th century, the banking system decided that they could never dream of a better deal. The better deal being that we have a monopoly. Governments, when they need money, need to borrow it from us and pay us interest. And we can create it out of nothing. It's a good deal. So we'll institutionalize that deal. And they created central banks. And later on, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, whose purpose is to keep the systemic status quo, i.e. a monopoly of bank debt money. Now, do you know the difference between the Nobel Prize of Economics and the other 5? Anybody? Very interesting. Very interesting. Nobody. Usually there's one person. Okay. First, the key differences are the following. The 5 Nobel Prizes that were created in 1905 by the Nobel Foundation, peace, physics, chemistry, medicine, and literature. The economics one was created in 1967. And it is not a Nobel Prize. It is a prize of economics in honor of Alfred Nobel. Interesting. And you know who decides it? And who pays for it? The Central Bank of Sweden. So, okay? You start seeing why there are 64 people who got Nobel Prizes of Economics, and not a single one has written one line about the money system. In 2002, I was on a panel with Paul Krugman, who is a well-known economist. We had in common to be from MIT. We were both trained there. So after my conference, he told me, but Bernard, didn't they tell you? I asked him, tell you what? Well, there's one piece of advice I always followed from our professors, because we had the same professors. Never touch the money system. You can touch anything else, but never touch the money system. And he has touched just about everything else except the money system. He got the Nobel in 2008. Right? So it works. You start seeing the degree and the sophistication of the blind spot. None of you even knew the difference. So we're stuck in a box. And the box has a lid on it. That's where we are. I'm going to go to the next topic. Does everybody follow me so far? If there are any fundamental understanding questions, ask me. Let's not engage in a debate, because otherwise I'll never finish. We can deal with the debate at the end. Okay? Yes?
Game theory, did that go into?
Game theory?
Yeah.
Game theory doesn't question about money. I mean, it's just another approach to human interaction. But they don't put in question the money. So let's now go to our topic in this Congress, archetypes, i.e. deep psychology. Why do I talk about deep psychology in the monetary domain? I'll be introducing you to a lady who has something to do with money, the Great Mother. And it's her adventures that actually explain a hell of a lot of what has been going on in our domain. Have you also noticed that every society in history always considers its money as self-evident? The Aztecs used feathers, and Mayas used coconuts, and some people use stones, and some people use pieces of metal. We use pieces of paper or electronic bits. Obvious. That basically means that it lives in the collective psychology. If you have never asked something, that means you have never thought about it. And if you ask your dad, he wouldn't have thought about it either. So that's why I got interested in collective psychology, and specifically in archetypal psychology, because it's the only one that I know that actually deals explicitly with collective emotions. And money has to do with collective emotions. It is a cliche that financial markets know only two emotions. It's also true. Greed and panic, fear. That is actually the question that drove me to look into deep psychology. Because why? Why is that the way? So my definition of archetypes is slightly more easy to live with than Jung's, at least for bankers. I'm defining an archetype as a pattern of emotions and actions which can be observed across time and societies or civilizations. So that makes it, less spiritual and therefore livable in some environments. It is enough for what I'm doing. It does not exclude, by the way, that there is a spiritual dimension, but we don't need to use it. And the second concept that we need to define is the shadow. When you repress an archetype, it does not go for vacations. It does not disappear. When you repress it, it manifests in the form of shadows. You'll marry the shadow. You'll have it as boss, as neighbor, as child. You're created around you. You attract it like you. So that is the two concepts that I will be using. Let me give you an example. The well-known sovereign archetype, the king for a man, the queen for a woman. This is Canterbury, King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba. The archetype is the integrator of all other archetypes. It is mobilizing and integrating the energies from all other archetypes. That's its role. It is androgynous. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to deal with all the feminine archetypes. So it's basically androgynous, male and female at the same time. Now, here's an example. This is Henry III in England, representing himself with a sword and the tree of life, and who dominating the sun and the moon. In other words, he is the sovereign integrating the yin and the yang. He deals with both sides of reality. Now, when you put yin, yang, and yung together, you get actually the understanding of the mechanism of shadows. When you have a shadow, it manifests in polar ends. A yang shadow, which is an excess of the energy, and a yin shadow, which is a deficit. So the ego is stuck between the two shadows, the tyrant and the abdicator, the weakling. Tyrants are surrounded by weaklings. Abdicators are surrounded by tyrants. Right? And the ego travels between the two. And as soon as you give power to a weakling over other people, he becomes a tyrant. Right? So in other words, it's all very coherent. And the key is the link of fear. The tyrant is afraid of appearing weak. And a weakling is afraid of asserting himself because he would appear tyrannical. Now, what do you do when you're dealing with a shadow? The only way is for the ego to actually integrate the two shadows by embracing them. We'll see why that is relevant at the end of my expose. So this is a synthesis of Jungian philosophy and Jungian archetypal psychology. Now let me introduce you to a lady, as I said. This is the Great Mother, the lady of Willendorf, 30,000 years ago. This is Inanna in Sumer and in Babylon. She is associated with the maternal, obviously, the material dimension, with abundance, with fertility, sexuality, and money. Every one of the earlier currencies, the first currencies, invariably were associated with the Great Mother archetype. Cattle is one of them. The cow, Hathor, definitely. The rupiah is still the head of cattle in the Hindu tradition. The Sumerian shekel, which is the oldest coin line object we know, on the one side had a bushel of wheat, and on the other side had inanna. And it was an evidence that you had paid your taxes to the temple of Inanna, the temple of the goddesses, where the priestesses were active, and where the rituals included sexual intercourse. So there you have absolutely all the taboos that we have, right? Sex, life and death particularly, and money. The word money itself comes from Juno Moneta. Juno is the goddess of pregnancy, of birth giving, of the moon cycle, the menstrual cycle. And the temple of Juno Moneta, in the basement of the temple was the mint of the Roman Empire. Talk about explicit relationships. This coin here says moneta on the one, this is Juno. These are all the tools to make a currency dating to the Roman Empire. You have it explicitly there. And that's where money comes from. Monete of Deutsch, monetary. Now, the Great Mother has had a bad time. Already in Sumer, it was the sky god of war that drove away the cow, looked as a monster, which was representing the feminine from heaven. And it is by killing her that he created this planet, and her bones or land, and the oceans or her blood, talking about explicit stuff. Okay? So, with that vision of the divine, we actually had a little more modest form of it, where you had Adam and Eve with the snake, which represents the Great Mother, which is the one who misled Eve into tempting Adam. We have had 350 years of witch hunting in Western Europe. This was not started in the Middle Ages. This started in 1384 in the Renaissance and lasted until Newton and Adam Smith in the 18th century. Right? This isn't that long ago. This is a modern phenomenon. Women who were a little too uppity didn't have a good time. 6 million women were murdered in Western Europe for witches. Now, in that environment, the shadow manifests. And it manifests how? Well, through her shadows. Greed and scarcity. Fear of loss. These are the shadows that we live with in our society. And they're embedded in our money system. We have created a currency that needs to be scarcer than its usefulness. I'm quoting from economic textbooks. Bank debt money needs to be scarcer than its usefulness. In other words, if everybody has enough money, it's worthless. Interesting. And the incentive to accumulate it is interest. The only way of having certainty of the future is have money, and the interest will come automatically. Right? You see the logic? So, economics is defined as the allocation of scarce resources through individual desire of accumulation. And we have put the field of economics in charge of our decisions in every domain. Education, medicine, everything. Economists decide what happens in our society. Economics dominate. The other thing that capitalism and communism have in common is materialism, isn't it? materialism is, the original word comes from mater, the mother. The wound is in the word. You have to go to the origin. By the way, the final thing is, have you noticed that we have 3 taboos? Sex, death, and money. They're the 3 attributes of the Great Mother. So, does that figure look familiar? Da Vinci, Vitruvius, the 5-pointed star, the most common flag. You have the sovereign, the lover, the Great Mother, the magician, and the priest. Sorry, and the warrior. 5 archetypes that are necessary for society to be in balance. This is the left side, is the yin side, the lover and the Great Mother. The right side, the warrior and the magician, or the yang side. The sovereign is the one who integrates. We have been standing like this for 5,000 years. It isn't very stable up there. We need to put our empathy, because the arms, the warrior and the lover, are the way we relate to each other. The warrior creates and maintains boundaries. The lover dissolves them. The magician is the way we relate to the material world by controlling it. The Great Mother is by empathy with it. Again, it's not very stable up there. Now, let's switch domains. That was the deep psychology bit. For the last 3 years, I've been working with Bob Ulanovich, who, as his name indicates, is American, right? University of Maryland. He's been 25 years on measuring the sustainability of natural ecosystems by measuring them as complex networks. And we've been able to develop a metric, and this is the first time that we have a metric, a single metric, that makes it possible to measure the sustainability of a complex network. Usually when you talk about sustainability, you have a whole bunch of indices, right? I mean, you haven't heard anybody say this is 97.5% sustainable, right? They kind of say, well, it's more in that direction than in that direction. Now we can do it with 97.5% or 98 or whatever it is. Now, sustainability, the results of this work is that any sustainable network requires a balance between 2 key emerging variables. The efficiency, i.e. the capacity for a system to process volume of whatever goes through it. In the case of a natural ecosystem, it's biomass. And resilience, the capacity to rebound from a shock, from a challenge, from a disease. And these 2 variables are in function of 2 structural variables. The important word is structural. Structural means that it depends on the structure of the network, not what goes in it. And they are, respectively, diversity and interconnectivity. Now, lower diversity and interconnectivity makes things efficient. Efficiency is generated by streamlining. Get rid of the secondary channels. And resilience is generated by having more diversity and interconnectivity capacity. So you need a balance between these 2 things. This is a low diversity environment, a monoculture, right? This pretty looking animal is a low interconnectivity. Why? It eats only one type of bamboo. When that bamboo gets in trouble, the panda is in trouble. Compare that with a rainforest, which is high diversity, and a squirrel, which eats anything. There are squirrels surviving and procreating happily in Central Park in New York, surrounded by highways. So that is the key variables. Now you say, what has that to do with money, right? Well, let me remind you. But let me first complete the thought on what we have found out. This is sustainability, the single metric. And here is the diversity and interconnectivity. There is one optimal point. And if you go below that, if you want to increase efficiency, you need to actually reduce diversity and interconnectivity, but that actually makes things brittle. These systems become brittle. They suddenly crash. If you go beyond the limit, you actually get stagnation. Nothing happens. Everything sits there. So there is a particular range. And that range is what we'll call the window of viability. All natural systems lie within a very specific range around this optimal point. Now, I remember I told you these variables are structural. Any network with the same structure has the same behavior. Now, what is our money system? Well, it's a monoculture, isn't it? All monies, all national monies, are created in the same way, in a highly regulated way, and a bank is amazingly similar to another bank because they're regulated to be identical. And they do the same thing at the same time. So, the current crisis, and by the way, I think we are in the middle of it, there's going to be more of the same coming rather quickly, probably this fall actually. We have had, it's treated, what is fascinating to me is that every banking crisis and every monetary crisis is treated as if it's the only one. We're now talking about this current one as being due to, you know, American real estate, okay, or derivatives. Well, the Russian ruble collapse is another story. The one in, everybody has always a different story. We have had 96 previous banking crashes in the last 25 years, plus 178 monetary crashes. Maybe we should put them a little bit together, find out what's common between them, rather than what's different between them. So, my claim is we are dealing with a structural unstable system. Structurally unstable. It doesn't matter how clever you are. It doesn't matter how many put and what regulations you put. The regulations will help. They reduce the frequency, but it will not disappear. Even before the last 25 years, we have had 48 major monetary collapses in history. The first one being 1639 in Holland with tulips. So, when you're dealing with a system like that, it is just an accident waiting to happen, and it's going to, if it's not going to be this one, it's going to be something else that will trigger it. In other words, our monetary system and financial system lives there. It's very efficient. The volume of foreign exchange transactions is 3.2 trillion per day, i.e., 50 times more than all the goods and services internationally exchanged worldwide. Extraordinarily efficient, but brittle. So, there's a question of when the next crash is, not whether. When and where. So that's why it has happened every time, and will happen as long as we have this monoculture. So, let's put the two things together. I've given you the psychology bit, I've given you the application of complexity science. Now, what are they saying, both of them, in terms of what the solution is? And the solution is very surprising. Guess what? This is the way our financial system works. Resilience is not even part of the map. We have efficiency is all matters. If you compare that with natural systems, resilience is the big block. and efficiency is out there. That is in balance. That is not in balance. That will crash. So we need other currencies than our monopoly. We need a second type of currency. What a surprise. A currency that actually relates to feminine values, to relationships. A yin currency. This is the way we live with a single monopoly. You have the competitive global economy with financial capitals being built with national currencies that are created by bank debt. They are competitive and scarce, and you have commercial transactions occurring. On the other side, you have cooperative regional economies where social capital is built and where you have community transactions. When you have a monopoly of a currency, what do? Well, there are two ways of getting resources to that place. The first one is non-profit organizations, right? They do good things, okay? And they do that by tax deductions, right? People get money to non-profits in order to have a tax deduction. And the second one is the government doing it through taxes, which then provide subsidies to the good stuff. Well, guess what? Taxes are not terribly popular, right? Have you ever noticed that we say that our children are the most important thing, but the teachers are paid, you need, I've seen a statistic in the United States. The salary of an investment banker is equivalent to 17,000 teachers. So maybe we have a bit of an imbalance somewhere. All right? Now, what am I talking about in terms of solution? Well, we need two economies. You need a yang economy and a yin economy. I am proposing that governments create a second currency, not banks. That is a currency that we created in sufficiency. And that's paid out to do yin things. Now, you still have the taxes for the yang economy, and let's call it contributions on the yin economy. Remember, the reason, the mechanism by which the monopoly is enforced is through taxes. If everybody needs to accept that currency because of taxes, if you have a contribution that is in that currency, which is not created in competition, which is created in sufficiency, then everybody can earn it. You could have, say, 10 hours a year, that's a currency that's an hour. 10 hours a year needs to be contributed in that particular currency. And you can create an eBay type market, an open market, electronically, all these things could be electronic, where you have exchanging. So if you have a contribution here, people who don't want to do anything, they can afford not to do it, that's fine. But then they have to buy it from other people in national money. So if I do something for the environment, if I'm teaching kids after hours, actually I can earn credits that I can now sell if I have more than I need. Okay? And the government determines the price of it. I wouldn't call it fixed price. Just require a contribution that is sufficient to provide the pool. That's a solution. That's systemic. That would create a mechanism where the archetypes are in balance. Here you have the yang economy activated by the warrior and the magician. And the lover and the great mother would be activated here. So, the last point. Monetary Tantra. The word Tantra I learned yesterday evening from Dali. Is Dali here? No. She explained to me that it comes from Sanskrit, which I knew, but I didn't know the meaning. It comes from the word Tanoti Triati. It's an abbreviation of these two. And it means to widen consciousness. To widen consciousness to include the polarities. That's what Tantra is about. So if the government requires taxes and contributions, payments in yang currency and in yin currency, you will have the two energies activated. This will solve, first of all, an enormous problem for governments. Governments cannot afford to spend more money conventionally from bank debt money because the financial markets then put the squeeze, which is what's going on right now in Europe, for example, and will go on this fall in the United States. So the budgetary constraints that government need to borrow money instead of creating itself money disappears. And I propose that the government creates the currency in the quantity necessary to solve all the ecological problems, the learning, and the social issues that we're dealing with. It makes it also possible for every person to follow their passion. Because have you noticed there are 3 tenors in the world? We only need 3 tenors. In Bali, everybody's an artist. They have a yin and yang currency. The yin currency creates a space where every art can be expressed. So we can actually have a balance between the two. Put it all together. What the issues are the following, from my view. We have gone through a Cold War that lasted about 50 years, which are 2 different ways of dealing with the industrial age. The one through markets and the one through government control. This whole industrial process was a consequence of the modernist age, which started in the Renaissance around 1500. It is itself an expression of the hyper-rationalist model, where reason was the only tool that makes appropriate understanding reality. Something that goes back to the Greeks in 500 BC. Now, what's common? You may notice that every one of these things feeds the next one. Hyper-rationalism became modernism. The modernism expressed itself in the industrial age, and the 2 ways of organizing it were the communist and the capitalist forms of organizing the industrial age. What they have in common is to be patriarchal. The patriarchal one, which has been going on for 5,000 years, is the wrapping of this whole thing, and that's where we're stuck. We're still dealt with a patriarchal value system and a money system that enforces it. I think we are at a choice point. Our civilization will collapse, or we'll have a breakthrough. And I believe the breakthrough is possible. I think meetings like the ones this Congress represents is all about that. How to break through this particular model of thinking. This is one image that describes male and the female. Those who were with yesterday evening's meditation may remember we had the little ball in our hands. I think it's a yin and a yang hand. The last time I looked, this looks like the nicest place in this neighborhood. This planet, we better deal with it appropriately. There's no substitute. So there are a couple of books available on this topic. The Russians among you have a better chance. Mystery of Money had been published in Russian. My New York publishers decided that America didn't have a money problem and therefore refused to publish Mystery of Money, which is available also in German and Chinese and Japanese and Korean, a bunch of strange languages, people who are open to different perspectives. The Future of Money has been available in both Russian and English and in 18 other languages. I have a website with a lot of information on for those who are interested. And by the way, on the 29th, next Tuesday, in the Open World Center here in Moscow, I'm giving a 5-hour workshop on this topic. There are cards here available. They're also at the reception and on the side for those who are interested in following up. Thank you very much for your attention.